What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorials.eu. In this video we are going to check out the Firebase Authentication module, which allows us to create a user in Firebase using our own code in order to then register a user, for example, and then log in that user into an application. And that is going to be crucial for many types of applications that you could use. For example, if you want to build a chat app, or if you want to use something like Tinder or create something like Tinder, Uber, Facebook, whatever, where you need an account, you will need to have this authentication module. And that's what we're going to cover in this video. So you're going to see all of the relevant steps. So let's get started. In this video, you are going to learn how to use the authentication module of Firebase and how to build a login as well as a register screen in Android using Kotlin in order to then basically create an account here in the authentication module via email, as well as log in to that account using that particular email that you used for the creation of the account. All right, let's get started. Create a new project in Android Studio, and I'm going to create one with an empty activity. Then press next and give it a name. In my case, I'm going to call it Firebase Auth Demo, which stands for Firebase Authentication Demo. And the package name could be something like EU tutorials, but I'm just going to keep it simple using com.firebase auth demo. And the language that we're going to use is Kotlin, as well as the minimum SDK is going to be the API 21, which allows us to make this application run on many devices around the world. Now let's press finish for it to create the application, for it to prepare the project. Once the project is ready, run the application once. Even though there's not really much happening yet and there's nothing interesting going to be displayed in the application, but what is interesting for us is actually going to come from the Gradle. And there are different ways to get to what we want here, but I just want to get a little bit of information about the actual SHA of my application, the SHA value. So here in signing report, double click on it and you will find this SHA-1 key. That's going to be the one that we are going to require. So make sure to copy it and then go over to your browser in order to go to this page here, console.firebase.google.com. And then you need to register. If you don't have a Google account, you will need one, or a Gmail account, and then you can basically log into Firebase and create a new project. So I'm just going to add a new project here. I'm going to give this the name of Firebase Auth Demo. You see this is going to be the unique identifier for my project, FireAuth A13. Then you can enable Google Analytics for this project, and you can decide to also deactivate it if you want to. Then you can also add an account, a Google Analytics account, in order to get details about how your application is used, for example, how often and so forth. I'm just going to use my tutorials.eu account and create a project. This will then take a little while until the project is ready to go. Once the project is ready, press continue and Firebase will lead you to your application. Now you can select Android here and get started. Here you will need to enter the package name. In my case, it was com. And if you don't recall it as I do, you can just go over to your application and check it out from here. In my case, it was com Firebase Auth Demo. I could give it the name, but that's optional, or I can leave it out. I'm just going to copy this SHA-1 key and I'm going to put it in here for debug signing certificates. This will make it easier for me to make my application run accordingly with this Firebase app. So then let's register my app. This file will be necessary and you need to add it to your app. Okay, so download this JSON file because it's going to be unique for your project, and then drag it into your project folder. And there, to be precise, into your app folder when you're in the project screen. Okay, so let's do that real quick. Let's go to here, not Android, but project. Open up your project, open up app, and that's where you want to drag it in. Okay, so let me drag that in there. and press OK. Now you see you will have your Google Services JSON here, or make sure that you have it there. And once it's there, press Next. And here you need to make sure that you add this to your product level Gradle build, which means you will need to have Google as a repository, then the dependency class path, and in all projects you also need to make sure that you have Google here. So let's do that real quick. We go to our project level build Gradle. Which one is it going to be? Well, it's easier to actually find it when you're back in Android. And here, project build Gradle. Now let's get rid of all of those additional windows here or pop-ups. And here we need to make sure we have the repository, that is Google, and then this class path. Okay, so add that in here in your dependencies, as well as in all projects. Make sure you have Google and JCenter. Once that is done, press sync now. Once that is also done, you can go back to your browser and select Kotlin if you built this project in Kotlin. And you can see we have this apply plugin line, which now is on the app level build Gradle. So going back, you can now select the app level build Gradle, which will be in your projects here. It's this one here, which says module:app. And here at the top, I need to have these two lines. So Google Services needs to be there. Com Android application is already there. Let's add this additional line here, which says com.google.gms.google-services. And then import the Firebase BOM. So this one inside of your dependencies, which means you will need to scroll the way down, all the way down up to here, where you can add the implementation. So implementation platform will be Firebase BOM. And then I also need to implement this analytics KTX so that I can use analytics in my application. Okay, so moving back to Android, let's add that in one as well. This implementation, which is com.google.firebase-analytics-KTX, standing for Kotlin X. Okay, so now we can sync that as well. And once it's synced, back in the browser, press Next. And then it will check if the app is running or has communicated with the server. So if you really want to make sure that it's actually going to run, before that, make sure that you run your app before you press Next. But even if you did, that's no problem. You can go back anytime here and it will find the connection. So if this doesn't work out for you and this is just going to be stale here and nothing's going to happen, you can skip this step as well. But if you press these buttons in the same order, in this right order, this should usually work out. But in my case, it also at one point didn't work out. So it can be confusing at times when it works and when it doesn't. But in the end, if it doesn't respond within a while, you could just skip the step and then you will be redirected to the Firebase overview screen. Okay, so in my case, it doesn't want to respond. So I'm just going to skip that step and you can see I'm back in this screen here. And by the way, this video is just part of a complete course. This is part of the complete Firebase Masterclass that I created, in which you will learn to build a complete shop app from scratch. So you're going to build all the components using Firebase and Firestore in order to build this amazing app. All right, so check out the link in the description where you will get the full course learning all of these things. And now the next step that we need to take is to go to authentication. And then you can see we have no users because we don't have a sign-in method. So let's go to sign-in methods. And here you can select the different sign-in methods that you want to allow for your users to use. And the simplest one is going to be email and password. I'm just going to enable that. And then I'm going to press save in order to enable this. So now if we go back to our authentication, we can add new users manually, or what is of course our goal, we can also add users via our application, and that's what we're going to do. All right, now back in Android Studio, let's go ahead and create a new activity. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a new empty activity, which I'm going to call login activity. And then inside of our build Gradle app, so the :app one, I also would like to use the material library. Okay, so in case you don't have it yet, you should also add this one here, which will allow you to use Google Material for your design. So com.google.android.material:121. Okay. I will update my theme colors because I also want to use a different color theme. Basically, I don't want to use these default colors that are given to me. I will use my own, which is a pinkish color, a dark color, which will be this gray black color, and then another pink, which will be the same pink as the color primary. So my accent color will be the same as the primary color, but of course you could use a unique one for that as well. All right, so then let's design the login screen. And this is something that you can do as you like. I'm just going to show you my XML code, how we are going to do it in this video, but I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I'm expecting you to already be proficient in writing your own XML layouts. So let's go ahead and check it out. So in my case, I'm using two drawables. So one of them is going to be this authentication screen background, which is the one that we use in our application. And then the tutorials.eu logo. And you can of course use your own images, but these are going to be the ones that I'm going to use in my activity login. And that's how it's going to look in the end. So you can see we have this background image with this tutorials.eu logo. Then we have this title saying login screen, as well as this edit text, login email, login password, then the login button, and then a linear layout which has the do not have an account, as well as the register text views. Okay, so looking at it in split screen, let's look at it step by step. So here I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can follow along if you really want to this way. So here at the very top we have our constraint layout. Inside of the constraint layout I'm using a frame layout. So this at the top here is a frame layout because I want to put elements on top of each other, which means I have an image view and on top of it I have another image view. So this image view is the background image view and this one is displayed on top of it. So it's like a second layer, which is laying on top of it. That's how you can use frame layouts. All right, and underneath the frame layout, I'm using this text view here, which is this login screen text view. Then I have this text input layout, which is this one, which is in the end going to have an edit text in it. So text input layout with all of these settings here, you can just type them in or you can download the file, as well as the edit text inside of the text input layout. And then we have a second one which follows the same principle. So we have this text input layout as well as this edit text inside of the text input layout. So you can already see this is not for complete beginners, so you should be aware of how to create the basic XML files or to create your own user interface. And then in the end I have this button here at the very bottom, which is this pinkish button, and a linear layout that has two text views in it. So the first text view says do not have an account or don't have an account, and then the second one just says register. All right, now let's go over to our manifest, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that it's not going to be my main activity that will be the starting activity, the launch activity, so to speak. I want this to be my login activity. So here inside of my Android manifest, I cut out this intent filter from my activity main, or this main activity, to my login activity. So now when I launch the application, it will directly go to this login activity for me. All right, now that we have that, let's also create a register activity. And now this is just how I will do it. You could, of course, also just change the login activity around a little bit and dynamically just change the name of the login screen text as well as the register screen text, or this register don't have an account. So this could be edit it, and you wouldn't have to create an extra activity for that. But in order to keep it simple, I'm just going to create an extra register account that we can then use to move back and forth between the two. But I'm just going to keep it simple and create a new register activity. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new empty activity. I'm just going to call this one register activity. And now let's also take care of the design of the register activity. It will be similar to the login activity. There's really not that much of a difference. And here again, feel free to create your own design and use your own as you like it. Okay, so I have basically the same design here. So I'm not going to go over the details. You can see the only difference really is the text of the button, the text of the label here, as well as the text of those two here at the bottom, the one saying already have an account and the other one saying login. Okay, so the rest is pretty much the same. The UI is the same. The only difference is really the text. But if you want to get more details about the user when he registers, you would need to make sure that you also have a couple of more added text here that the user can then in the end enter his values in, for example, the name or the age or whatever you want to also collect from the user. But as we are really just focusing on the auth module, we won't need those because we can't even store them without using the actual Firestore functionality, which we will do later on in the course. But for now, this is going to be it. Okay, so now that we have the register screen also designed, let's take care of the actual programming, which means that I want to give these elements a click event. So inside of register, I'm just going to say, once we click on that register button, there should be a bunch of code happening. And we're going to go over the code step by step. So let me add that and then run over it step by step with you. Okay, so for this to work, you can see that I will need a bunch of dependencies here, a bunch of imports. So one of them being onCompleteListener, then the auth result, Firebase auth, and Firebase user for this to work. So here I'm using button register set onClickListener inside of the onCreate method. So once we click on this button register, which is, by the way, this register button here, once we click on it, we will run the set onClickListener, and it will then check if the user has entered something. So I want to make sure that this has an entry as well as this has an entry. So these two edit texts, they should have a text in them entered by the user. That's why I'm checking here. Is it empty? And if it is empty, then we will let the user know, please enter an email address. So we're using a make text here, or a toast make text, in order to display a short toast on the screen saying, please enter an email address. And how do we check if it was an entry or not? Well, we check et register email, which is this edit text here. So we're saying, is it, even when it's trimmed, is it empty? So especially when it's trimmed. So we're trimming this here, by the way, is a way to trim empty spaces from the beginning as well as the end. So we're using this lambda expression here for this magic. So we're trimming it. And then the next thing we check is, did the user enter a password? So we do the same thing here. As you can see, we're trimming. So this time we're checking the edit text password here. And if that one is empty, then we display this toast make text. And if none of those two things happen, so if they're not empty, so the user has entered an email address as well as a password, we will take that email address and we will trim it. So if the user accidentally had an empty space in there, we're getting rid of it. The same goes for the password, and we're storing them in those two variables that we created. And now comes the actual Firebase stuff. So everything up till this point was basic Android development, right? Now comes the Firebase specific stuff. So here we go to Firebase auth. We use the Firebase Authentication class, and we get the instance. Okay, we get the instance of our connection to the Firebase authentication, and we then create a user with password and email, or email and password. That's the method name here, and that's exactly what it will do. It will create a new user with an email address and a password, and therefore it will need an email address as well as password that you pass over to it. So we're passing this email that we have gotten, as well as the password that we've gotten from the user when he entered it and when he pressed on this button, register button. And then we have this add-on complete listener. So this add-on complete listener, there are multiple overloads. And one of the overloads is where we get the task here, and we check if the task was successful. So if the task was in fact successful, what we can do is we can go ahead and create a Firebase user out of the task, because the task will give us a result, and there is a user inside of this result, because that's what this Firebase auth task is going to deliver basically. And then we can, for now, just show a toast saying you are registered successfully, or you were registered successfully maybe. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to send the user over to the main activity. Okay, so if we were successful registering the user, we are going to also directly log him in, so to speak. So we are going to go ahead and create a new intent, sending the user from the register activity to the main activity. And while we're at it, we're getting rid of the extra layers of activities that we had. So for example, if we move from the login activity to the register activity, back to the login activity, back to the register activity, then we have a bunch of instances of our activities running in the background or being in the stack, so to speak. And we want to get rid of those. That's what this line does. So it sends us with some extra information. For example, the Firebase user ID, which will be the UID. So Firebase user is, by the way, the Firebase user that we created, which is a Firebase user object, which is the user directly coming from that task result that we had. So now we can use that Firebase user and send it over via intent to this other activity. And we also send over the email address of the user via that same intent. And then we start the activity with that particular intent, and we finish our current activity, which means we close the register activity, we get rid of all of the other activities, so we are in the main activity, and when the user presses back, he will not get back to the register activity, but for example, the app will close. And then if none of that was true, so if the task was not successful, then we are going to just print the exception. So something could have gone wrong when trying to register, for example, no internet connection or something like that. Okay, in order to test this correctly, we of course also need to go to our main activity and design it so that it will do something with all of that information that we sent over to it. Okay, so let's go over to activity main XML, and here we will go ahead and design something. So I'm going to create a very, very simple design here, nothing fancy. The only thing that I want to display is basically displaying the text view, which says you are logged in successful, as well as a text view with the user ID and an email ID. And then finally a button at the bottom, which allows us to log out. Okay, so this is going to be the UI. You are logged in successfully, then the user ID, the email address, and as well as the logout button. Okay, so in the main activity now, we can of course get that extra information that we did send via our login or register activity, to be precise. So how I'm going to do that is I'm just going to get the extra string, user ID, as well as email ID. Okay, so this is here where we set the information. So we send it over via intent. And here at this point, we are getting the string extra. So we are retrieving the data. Okay. And we're storing it in user ID as well as email ID. And then we can just go ahead and display it in our text view user ID as well as text view email ID. So we say the text view user ID, this one here, should be replaced with whatever the user ID is. So it's going to say user ID : and then the actual user ID. And for the email ID text, it should do the same thing with the email ID. Okay, and then I also want to be able to log out. Now let's look at how we can actually log out. So I'm going to give my button, my logout button, this one here, a functionality. I want this button to be able to actually log us out. in order to log out, you can use this one line. That's it. So Firebase auth.getInstance.signout. So this will sign the user directly out. And then what I will do is I will move over from my main activity to my login activity and close my current activity. So if the user is signed out, there's no reason for him to be on the main activity anymore. Okay, so then the next point would be to also assign a click event to our login activity. But before we do that, let's actually test our application and see if we have any errors. And if that works, then we can already register. And by the way, now you should change from Firebase auth demo to app here, because if you try to rerun your application, it might not have worked. Okay, so let's see if we can actually get to the All right, so there we are. We have the login screen with the email ID as well as password. So let me just enter dennis@gmail.com and with a super secure password here. And let me, actually, I'm in the login screen. So I need to go to the register screen now. Let's actually change this real quick. So here inside of our project manifest, I'm going to make my register activity the start activity where we start from. Otherwise, of course, we can design our login activity, or actually we need to add a button functionality to this register text view here at the bottom, or an on-click listener, so that we can move over to the register screen. Okay, but I'm gonna keep it simple. I'm just gonna say, okay, let's make the register screen the starting screen, at least for now, for testing purposes. So here I'm going to register with this amazing email address as well as password, register, and there you are logged in. This is my user ID, this is my email ID as well. So the cool thing is now you can go to your authentication, you can press this reload button and you will find this particular user that you just created here. So it's YWLOU. Okay, let's check it out. YWLOU. So it's this exact user that I'm logged in that is available in my authentication. So let me see if I can log out. There we are. I'm logged out now. And now let's go ahead and take care of the login screen so that we can actually log in back to our application. Okay, so I will now go ahead and go to my login activity. So there we are, login activity. And first of all, I will give this little TV register, this little button here, I'm going to give it the functionality. I'm going to give it the skill of sending me over to another activity. So now it will start an activity once I click on this text view to send me over to the register activity. Let's test this real quick. Okay, so actually now we can go back to our Android manifest and actually make our login activity our start activity, which should be the case because you don't want the user to go to the register activity to be bored by always having to do this extra step of clicking this button. Okay, so because usually he will be just logging in. It's only one time that the user will register, right? So let's go ahead and register. And you can see I can go over to the register screen. Now I don't have the same thing for the login screen. It would be quite easy. So you can go to your login activity. You can copy this code. You can go to the register activity and here add another on-click listener. And this one will be TV login. And here we go from the register activity, actually just from this to the login activity. Okay, so if we rerun this, you will see that we can now click on register and click on login. Now, of course, we have this problem of creating these extra layers all the time, right? And now I can go back. You can see I can click back many times, and that is exactly why I added this line here, this intent flags, so that once I register, they all go away. All of these layers of having these extra click events and so forth. Alternatively, I can, of course, not send the user with a new activity. What I can just say is I will execute on back pressed. That would be the alternative. And this way, the user will not go and create a new activity all the time. He will just jump between those two. Okay, so let's double check this. There we are, register and login. And now let me click back and you can see it closes the application directly. Okay, now let's actually assign the functionality to login, and it will be very similar to the register activity. There's really just one tiny change, and that is going to be the actual, well, if you look at it, this part here, this create user with email address. So you can actually just copy this whole code from your register activity, this set on click listener for button register, and implement it here or paste it in here. And there will be a couple of changes. So you can see now I'm calling this button login, which is this login button in the login screen, this pinkish button there. And then I can go over, and it's actually the login activity. And then I can go over and check, are the entries empty? So did the user not enter an email address or a password? If he didn't, then display a toast saying please enter password or please enter email address. Then we get the email and password from those added texts. Okay, this et login email and et login password. Okay, these are the two added texts that we created. And then I can go over here and sign in with email and password. So you can see that's the difference really. Saying sign in with email and password. Here we're passing in the email and password. We have an incomplete listener. If the task was successful, we're just going to say toast make text. You are logged in successfully. And then we have this intent that sends us to the main activity. We have these intent flags, which get rid of extra layers of the other activities that we had open. We sent over extra information. So this time we put extra information, the user ID, and we do the same thing, but this time it says current user UID. Okay, so it's not the same text that we had in register activity where it was task result user. So it's not going to be the same as we did here where we had task result, but we have current user. And the UID is the unique ID or the user ID. And then we put that extra information of email address over. We start the activity, we finish the current activity. And if that didn't work, so if we had an error logging in, for example, no internet connection or so, then we will display the toast showing the exception. Okay, so now at this point, let me run this again and see how I can actually log in with that user. And let me first log in with a user that doesn't exist. So Eminem@gmail.com has not yet created an account in my app. So let me try to log in as Eminem. There's no user record corresponding to this identifier. The user may have been deleted. Okay, so I cannot log in as Eminem, but let me log in as Dennis because that user exists. And actually, let me not enter a password first to test if this please enter password appears. Yes, it does. So this is the toast that we had created. Now it appears. And now I can go ahead and log in with my super secure password and log in. There we are. We're logged in as dennis@gmail.com. Okay, so that was the demo of how to create the authentication or how to use the authentication module to create a registry screen in which you can register a user, as well as the login screen in which you can log in a user to your application. And now you can display user relevant data here, which is specific to the user, which we already do, which means the user ID as well as the email ID, they are user specific. Alrighty, thank you very much for watching the video and watching it all the way to the end. If you liked the video, then please leave a like and also hit that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. And as always, when you see such a video, which is part of a course, you can of course also get the full course. You can find the link in the description below where you will get a huge discount. And check out one of those other two videos up here.